Isn't it good to be in Iowa? Aren't we glad this is where the election season starts? Isn't that great? Well, it's a treat to be here, and my first time here some years back, I was invited by he's the best friend I've got in Congress. I don't know if y'all know Steve King. Yeah. So anyway, we had some judges, if you recall, who had said in an opinion that, and this got my attention, having been a former district judge and chief justice, they said that there is no biological evidence to support nature having a preference over whether it's heterosexual marriage, same-sex marriage. And so I was asked, because I wanted to legislate and knew I would never do it from the bench, so I left and ran for the opportunity to legislate, not from the bench. And anyway, just fell in love with people here going across Iowa. And so when I knew how this election would shape up, it starts here. The guy that I endorsed is like April or May. I thought Ted has really got a good chance. Now, we're pro-life, right? I mean, and Steve and I are on the Judiciary Committee together. We had a doctor testify. I think he said he did over 1,000 abortions in late term. And it was just meaningless to him. And then one day it hit him like a ton of bricks. I had to get up and walk out of the hearing at one point because he was describing what he said gives him nightmares now, that he would feel for something that he figured was a limb and pull it off, and then find another one and pull it off, and find another. And when he had done that 4 times, he felt for something bulbous and would grab it with his clamps and crush it and pull it off. Now, just my own personal history. My wife Kathy and I have, well, in June, we will have been married 38 years, but our first little blessing from God decided to try to come 8 to 10 weeks prematurely, probably 10 weeks. And back then, chances were not really good for us there in Tyler, Texas. And so they tried to delay her birth because the doctor said, it's amazing. He's a strong Christian. He said the way God works, if labor starts early, the development process speeds up. So however much longer we can keep her in utero, that increases her chance of making it once she's born. Well, that started on Saturday. On Tuesday morning about 5 a.m., Katie had decided she was coming. And when she was born, she let out a cry, and I said to the doctor, that's good, right? And he said, there's no way to know. And having done a lot of work in the medical field and defended a lot of doctors, actually, I knew a lot about retrolental fibroplasia and blindness in preemies if they're exposed to too much oxygen. And so when I saw them go in her little isolate from 20% to 40 to 60 to 80 to 100%, I knew she was in trouble, or they wouldn't keep doing that. The pediatrician didn't see me come sitting there, and I was, praying for Katie. He came rushing through and went straight to her isolate. He was going to wait to intubate her, to get the tube into her lungs to get the oxygen directly, until the team from Shreveport got there, where they had the top-level neonatal ICU. And he worked, and there were 3 times when the sensors went off and they lost her, and then he does mouth-to-mouth, and they bring her back 3 times. And anyway, he came out just dripping sweat, but he'd gotten her intubated, and he saw me and he said, it's not as easy as it looks. And I said, Doctor, it doesn't look easy. Thank you for working so diligently on our child. Well, the ambulance got there to take her to the top-level neonatal ICU, and I was really torn. Kathy was going to have to stay in the hospital there in Tyler, you know, and she was having some problems, and she said, look, go do anything you can for our child. And so I went, and the reason we were midway between Shreveport and Dallas on Interstate 20, and the pediatrician said, I said, which one do you recommend? He said, either is great, but they have a little better survival rate over in Shreveport. This is back at that time. And so we went. I come in, and the neonatologist said, you need to come here, and they brought me where they had put Katie in her isolette, had all the electrodes, diodes hooked up, and he said, now, it's very important that you touch her, caress her little face, rub her little arm, you know, and talk to her. Her eyes are not developed good enough yet that she can see you, but she knows your voice from in utero. She's been hearing your voice for months. You talk to her and touch her. And they said you can stay for 2 hours and you have to take breaks. Well, after I'd been there for a while, and you understand with a preemie, one of the last things to develop are the lungs, and that's the biggest problem. And they're so undeveloped, the breathing is so intensely shallow. So it's just really fast, shallow breaths. They were irregular, and after I'd been there an hour or so, the doctor came over and he said, have you looked up at the monitors? And I said, no, and I looked up. And he's still fast breathing, still fast heart rate, but they had stabilized. They were not erratic. And he said, she's drawing strength from you. She's drawing life from you. Well, you know, I can't get up. She had latched on to the end of my index finger with her tiny little hand, and she wasn't letting go, and she was holding on. And if she was drawing strength from me, there's no way I was leaving. 8 hours later, they said, sir, you got to take a break. I said, I can't leave. Well, they made me leave. They said, you can't be allowed. You've got to take a break. This isn't healthy for you. I said, anyway, I took a short break, and my mind was back there with Katie. I ran into the back of a lady, and the officer was very kind. But anyway, I couldn't wait to get back. But having had a child hold on to the end of my finger, clinging to life because she wanted to live. And she's visiting from Berlin. She's an artist in residence there. She was one of 12 artists picked to live in Shanghai for 6 months. She is incredible. The thought that anybody could pull those limbs from that child or flush that child down a commode or take parts and say whether we're going to sell them or not, they'll be helpful down the way somewhere for research. It is so abhorrent. It is so unconscionable that at times it is just so difficult to understand how people can take the positions they do, including a president who, as a senator, would be totally opposed to a law that says if the abortion fails, you've got to let the child live. Opposed to that kind of legislation. I'm telling you, I've known Ted Cruz for a number of years now, and everybody talks about how brilliant he is. Yes, he's incredible as a debater, as an attorney arguing before the Supreme Court, an attorney arguing before his wife. He is absolutely incredible. And I know that I have had temptations, like a lot of people, to want to support the second person in the history of humanity not to need to ask God for forgiveness. I know that's a struggle, but I have settled on an endorsement that is not moving. It's for the guy who knows who he is. He knows who God is. And he knows that Creator that our founders wrote about. He knows our rights don't come from government. They come from God, and our job is to protect them, every one of those rights. So it's an honor to be with you tonight. I am excited. I'm thrilled. Oh, my Aggie buddy, Rick Perry, Governor Rick Perry. Y'all, Rick Perry.